today's program, we will be looking at democracy. What exactly is democracy? And how relevant is this democracy to Africa? And what can we do to make it work, if at all? But first, we start with stories making the news in Africa. We go to Egypt, where President Abdel al-Sisi has been sworn into a third term in office, and that's supposed to be his final term as president of Egypt. And thus a couple of days ago, he reappointed his prime minister, who is Mustafa Madbouly, to retain the post of prime minister and to form a government for Egypt. And you should remember that General al-Sisi was a military leader who turned civilian, and it is his second elections that he has put himself up for candidacy. And in those elections held last December, he polled 90+% of the votes cast. His nearest contenders were in a single-digit percentage terms. And in that country, what we should know, because most times we hardly know of some of the nitty-gritties of their political system, the presidents cannot dissolve parliament without first going to a referendum for the people to give him the authority and the power to dissolve parliament. We move to South Africa. They have just held their general elections in that country, and they were generally free and fair. That is an up for Africa. This time round, the ANC political party, which has been a dominant party for the last 30 years, lost its majority in parliament. It would normally govern without the need for a coalition of other parties to shore up its numbers. But this time round, it has to govern with the consent of other parties, through which it should be able to form a stable government, because of the reason that in the last polls just held a couple of days ago, the ANC only managed to pull 40% of the vote. Remember the last elections, the ANC had over 50% of the vote in the last parliament, controlled an overwhelming number of seats, and therefore could establish the government without any consent of smaller parties. But this time around, it polled 40% and has 159 seats in the parliament. The DA, Democratic Alliance, has only 21.8% of the vote. It is the second largest party by this election, as it has happened in the couple of elections gone by. The MK, that of Jacob Zuma, polled only 14.58% of the vote and has 58 seats. The EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters Party, polled 9.5% of the votes and has only 39 seats. There are other parties, but the numbers are negligible. And they too, some of them, of course, will be going to parliament, because in South Africa, the manner of voting is proportional representation. It's not by the first past the post system, but by the number of votes you are able to acquire by districts or by national numbers. That would determine the number of seats you would get in the parliament. And it is the parliament that elects the presidents. So you could see how it is now that if the ANC cannot form a coalition, then it would only take the DA, the MK party, the EFF, the IFP, and other parties to come together and have their own majority and elect a president. Because remind you, the ANC only polled 40% of the votes, and 60% there is held by the various parties. We go to Ghana. Ghana will be expecting their elections in December this year. And already political campaigning is in top swing. The NPP, National Patriotic Party, will be contesting with the National Democratic Convention, which is now in opposition and wants to be in power through the ballot box. And to that end, the Vice President of Ghana now, Muhammadu Bawumia, is moving one step further. He is saying to us that government of Ghana is going to procure 200 electric buses to ease the problem of public transport in Ghana. He says that it's because of the fact that they have recognized that the unstable price for fuel is leading to upward trajectory of transport fares, and that by introducing electric cars in that country, they will be able to manage the issue of public transport. And you should remember that Ghana has been holding very relatively successful elections, and the NDC is fielding a former vice president who was there in 2012 to be the candidate for this year's election. And we would expect that fireworks would play because given the economic turmoil, the cost of living crisis affecting Africa, incumbent government will be having a hard time retaining their seats or their majority, as we've seen in South Africa. But the good news is coming from Ghana for the first time this year, because they have managed in Q1 to have a surplus in trade. A trade surplus is happening now in Ghana. In Q1, that is between January and March, the level of export exceeded their import by 11.5 billion Ghana shillings. No, I will not tell you in dollars. No. I will allow you to begin to appreciate African currency for their own weight. So a total of 11.5 billion shillings in surplus. When you compare the exports to the imports, they were able to export more than. And still on Ghana, you cannot believe this, really. You cannot believe this. The export price, the average, increased by 20.4%. That's very good. So it is telling you something, that when they were exporting, the prices for their own commodities enjoyed an average of 20.4%. That's just something for Africa to notice. That when you are exporting your own goods, there is a potential for its export value to grow, to be higher. So that is really very good news. That's for Ghana. So they're comparing Q1 alone, and let us see what they're going to do for the remainder of the year. But then let us talk one more thing about this Ghana trade surplus. What were the chief exports of Ghana? Well, it was gold. Was number one. Gold. 2 was raw oil. Crude oil was number 2. And then cocoa beans, cashew, cocoa peanuts. They were 3, and then the others constituted the major exports. But then what did you notice? Still raw crude. Still gold. Nothing like manufactured products. Still raw materials. Well, that's still Africa, and African governments have to revolutionize that. You cannot continue since independence to be embedded in the export of raw materials over the need for you to improve on those raw materials. This exporting gold, crude, cocoa beans, and whatever. That is not good enough. We need to put value to those commodities. But that anyway is the good news for Ghana, and we hope to see peaceful and credible elections in Ghana, just like in South Africa. Democracy. Democracy has been the key word for the last many decades, and everywhere in the world you see countries talking about democracy. And even in Africa, we talk about democratic governments. Of course, Democracy being its general meaning, that of people having a say in the government, is not new. It's as old as history itself. From the German tribes there, to the Buganda Empire in Uganda, to the Igbo and the Hausa, to the Manis, there has always been a kind of checks and balances in the hands of the people themselves. Some of them had parliaments with different names that were always consulted on issues of government. Some of them had what you would call advisors who also had powerful influence. And some of them could remove those in power through rotational means, that's turn by turn. Even in Greece, which is said to be the father of democracy or modern democracy, had a strong assembly of people, commoners, the lords, the high-ranking, who would meet in the Colosseum and discuss and agree on issues of government and economics and social affairs. When in 1991 the Soviet Union collapsed, it brought an opportunity for the West to be the dominant international power led by the US, and they prescribed democracy as the means and the forms to be able to access finances from the World Bank, the IMF, and other international lenders, because they were the chief creditors. And so governments after government in Africa dramatically were discarding one-party rule and adopting the multi-party democracy, which is said to be a major means for ensuring economic growth and development on the continent. Yeah. So the Americanized version of democracy has been one which has been a precondition for economic support from any major financial institution, because Russia at the time, through the Soviet Union, had collapsed flat. And before they collapsed, they were also a balancing economic force, because the two were giving out grants and loans and other credits to governments, especially in Africa. And that was a time for competition to access economic means from the great powers. But with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the US was the only dominant power, backed by the EU, who constituted the so-called international order. But then since 1991 to present day, we have seen that not much has been achieved economically. That while we were striving and trying to be democratic through periodic elections, term limits on the power of the presidency, we are still where we are in general terms. Massive unemployment, lack of industrialization, porous and poor infrastructure, level of corruption is heightening. But however, level of donor support through NGOs, through grants and through loans have always been high, very high. In all of this time, since 1991 to date, where are those money going? Where are those grants going? And how is this democracy not been able to bring about this success? Let me tell you something. We have spent too much time with this democracy, meaning that we should have political parties arguing it every now and then, that even after elections, the issues of fraud and issues of division that succeeds and continues to persist after elections. This competition for power has reduced African states into tribal and regional lines, such that elections have tended to become exercises of tribal census, counting my people, how many of my people I have, how many of their people can go and vote for them. It has degenerated into a kind of tribal census that has continued to divide people. So that's the democracy, really, that it persists with divisions, arguments, counter-arguments, fears of coups and instability, And while all that is going on, corruption gains hold and economic success for the people is stagnant. It is this democracy of competition of centers of power that has to be re-examined. It is this aspect of political dissension, of top and continuous criticism of governments, and even stifling, blockading governments through the opposition that has defined democracy. But we fail to realize that this democracy we're practicing was not what we saw happened in those countries that are now claiming to be advanced democracies, who benefited from slavery and exploitation via colonialism and neo-colonialism, or the blatant seizure of foreign lands, which they turned to their own land, and they took hundreds and millions of our people to help them develop those parts of the world. And those economies were strong, stable before this democracy we are practicing now began to take hold. And then we in Africa are struggling to bring development via a system that perpetuates division, and bitter division for that matter. We need to redefine democracy. Democracy is any form of government that consciously and deliberately improves on the economic and social lives of the people. It could be kingship. It could be the presidency. It could be a prime minister. It could be anything, even elected leaders, or leaders elected by consensus or agreed upon by consensus. The issue is that after that power change, or after that agreed means of power change, there should be a collective voice, a collective agenda that should actually seek to improve the lives of other people. Gone should be the divisions. Gone should be the animosity. That is why I see that when we define democracy, it should be on the economic well-being of the people that it reflects, and nothing more, nothing less. China is a democracy. India as well is a democracy. Saudi Arabia is a democracy. Russia is a democracy. Qatar is a democracy. Because there is measurable improvement in the lives of the people in those countries. Africa should adopt a system where political parties can contest elections, but there should be ways and means where they come together at a national level to spur on development, to ensure infrastructure is there, to ensure access to healthcare, to ensure economic broad-based development in the very lives of the people. The squibbling and squabbling should stop after the elections. We do not have the luxury of going to use slaves. We do not have the luxury of going to exploit others. We only have the luxury of coming together after elections to constitute a development agenda where we work with governments, where the government itself is accommodative, destroys parties per se. By I mean destroying parties, having the parties also being part and parcel of the government, or perhaps creating something hybrid that may even have to do away with political parties. Just so that people who want to be in politics, who have an agenda, who have prospects for helping the country, can attain power via some popular means. And when they come there, everybody should find which means to be accommodated in that new political system. The division, dissension that has always been characterized by military coups and instability should stop in Africa. We have to devise ways and means where power is meant to be used to bring economic benefits. And whoever can bring that economic benefit can continue to retain the confidence of the people who they are leading. That is democracy. We have basically been using the westernized version of democracy to inflict pain on the people even after elections have been held, where we spend more time trying to consolidate that power so that the opposition cannot get hold of it. And we forget about the issues that are really meant to be used to ensure economic prosperity. This is Cyril Jengo. I am your host, and my producer has been Titus Kiregu. Thank you very much.